Genesis does what Nintendo don't. That's right, you geeks. You've made it into the Echo Screen, the official podcast of the Clan of the Grey Wolf. As always, I am your host, the Commodore. And we're going to break from what we've been doing recently. We're going to do, I think, we look back and we kind of saw that really the whole reason we started the Clan of the Grey Wolf website was to talk about video games, at least to some extent. We've got a lot of other interests, but video games really were the reason we kind of kicked this thing off. And we realized we hadn't done a whole lot of video gaming podcasts. So we decided to shift gears a little bit today. We're going to do a little generational warfare. We're going to talk about, going to go back through the last couple console generations. We're going to talk about the winners. We're going to talk about the combatants, the systems that went at it, the consoles that battled each other for dominance of the video game markets in America. And we are talking about America here. And we're going to talk about the consoles that really made the difference, the ones that won the generations and left the others behind. So, let's get a move on. The other thing we're breaking from tradition today is we don't have Boomer with us.
Because I killed him.
Because you killed him, but you are.
Rue.
And we are going, Boomer's specialization is not in video games.
He is the awful gamer.
He is the awful gamer, but we don't hold that against him. In fact, we like that. I mean, to some degree, that must, I guess, introduce some kind of normalcy to his personality. No?
No.
Okay. I tried. If he's listening, and I'm sure he is, I really tried defending you. But anyway, so what I thought we would start by doing is talking about the first system that we used, the first thing that we played that really kicked off video gaming for the both of us. Doesn't have to be necessarily the one that really made it take off for us, but what was the first console you ever played, or the first video game recollection you have?
Actually, the first video game I ever played was, sounds like a crazy cliche, but Super Mario Brothers.
Sure.
In the arcade, I was in first grade, up in Vermont, which is not exactly a mecca of activity.
No.
But they did have an arcade at the local mall, and I found that they had a they had Super Mario Brothers there. Took me forever to figure out how to jump past the first gap, but a lot of quarters went into that.
Well, there must have been just a slew of buttons to choose from.
Yeah.
How did you ever find the jump button?
Eventually, I found the run button, too, so I could get over the second gap.
Wow,
but
that's pretty
that's
cool.
Another story.
That is innovation right there.
So, Super Mario Brothers, first game, I was completely enamored with it. A few months after I first discovered that, I went to a friend's house, and he started playing Super Mario Brothers.
And there was Super Mario Brothers inside your own house.
I was freaking astounded. And of course,
no doubt.
Asked for one. Got my NES that Christmas, and have never looked back.
Cool. Yeah, I think that's probably not unlike most of the folks that are our age. They might have known a couple games from the arcades, but the NES was really the introduction to video games for a lot of folks out there in our generation. So my first experience, kind of jumping back a little before the NES, we actually couldn't have console systems, and I didn't go to a whole lot of arcades as a kid.
Because they're the devil?
No, it really didn't have anything to do with that.
Oh.
I mean, maybe they are the devil, but we really didn't have any. But my first exposure to video games, my dad did have a Commodore 64. Actually, he had a Commodore 128. I know we had, and we played a tremendous amount of games on that. I couldn't even go into some of the games that I played initially. I know I played a lot of various games all over the place because there were so many games for the Commodore 64. It was before the licensing concept came along with the NES. So anybody with a computer could basically program a game for Commodore.
Basically, your first console was one of the ones that ushered in the great video game crash of 1983.
It absolutely was, and I think, but I like to think that the Commodore and the more PC side of things had less to do with it than the Atari boys did with just a bevy of crap that was out there for those consoles. But I guess you're right. I guess there was a contribution there.
Well, something interesting about the video game crash in the early 80s is that it kind of ushered in a more structured generational kind of thing, which is kind of the point of this podcast.
We're going to jump, I think, first to before we get into the first generation of consoles, we're going to take a look at. You have a theory of success that because we don't want to give everybody the impression that we're going to use purely objective criteria to decide the winners here. So what kind of criteria are we going to give them?
Well, this is Bru's grand unified theory of how to pwn your console generation. That any sort of game companies, console manufacturers should, I believe, look into before they create anything. But
kind of an overstatement, but I get you. Gotcha.
My idea is that three things conspire in each generation in some form, in some weight of each other. Sometimes one thing's more important than another. But three main things that help make a certain console successful in each generation. The most successful, I should say, and we're talking in terms of worldwide sales, because
worldwide sales. But it should be noted throughout the podcast that we're going to focus on the battles that happened in North America in terms of what systems were available. But whenever we cite any statistics of total sales, we're talking worldwide sales, because I just don't think it's probably useful at that point to talk about just what was sold in North America, even though we're going to talk about the consoles that were only available here. So, all right, continue with the unified theory.
So, the first important bullet point here is price.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
We've seen and are seeing.
Wait, price being important in the marketplace?
Yes, strangely enough.
Wow, unbelievable.
When you have a $600-700 CDI 3DO, or
you making fun of my CDI?
Yes, I am.
Bastard.
Well, you're one of the three people that bought one. But
500,000, as my statistics will show later.
Or the current generation with the PS3. Price is very important. And if you put a giant ass price tag up there, people are going to be more hesitant to splurge on that system. So there's price. You have to be fairly low in price. Games. You really just need some good games. I mean, you need and that includes first and third party games. Yes.
Cool.
And the third thing is innovation. Not quite as important early on, and unless you want to talk about graphics and stuff like that. But more recently, the PlayStation was a big success, in part because it moved to CDs at a good time to do that. The PlayStation 2 was innovative in that it was I think it was the first to have a standalone DVD player inside it.
Right.
The Wii is very successful right now because it has motion controls.
Right. You could easily go through these consoles, and we will in just a minute, and talk about the things that were innovative about all of them. It might not have been as drastic, which maybe is more accurate to what we're trying to talk about. Maybe what necessarily, I think it's important. It might have just not been drastic innovations like they're trying to do today. So, good. I think now that we've got some ground rules, we're ready to dive right in. So the first console generation that we're going to look at, we're actually going to skip ahead a little bit. Okay, all you Atari 2600 folks out there might be a little disappointed, but we're gonna fast forward to the third generation of consoles, which, for those of you that don't know, are right around the time that you've already talked about, the era of the NES, circa 1985 through about 1989. There's no way that's going to stay. It's going to fall
Have
right
faith.
over. All right, we'll see. So we've got the era of video games emerging from the crash of '82, and the dominance that video games begin to play on the younger generation, because video games, even before the crash, weren't necessarily toys. I think. And one of the ways that they begin to reemerge through this generation is they become marketed again as toys. That's how they initially get the NES even to get sold on shelves. They have to sell it with Rob the Robot to sell it as a toy.
Well, I would argue with that point.
Okay.
I would say that the inclusion of Rob the Robot and calling, instead of calling them video games, they were like game packs,
Sure.
PAKs, which makes no sense, but it doesn't mean anything necessarily. It was trying to market it not as a toy. I think they were trying to basically say, look at this advanced computer system, the Nintendo Entertainment System.
Right.
It was called the Family Computer in Japan,
Right.
because I believe that they were trying to get away from the whole toy stigma. Funnily enough, Nintendo, which has a bit of a kiddie reputation now, was all about, hey, look at us, we're a multimedia system.
Right.
Before multimedia was cool, and stuff like that. That's how they got their foot in the door.
Right.
But I think in the end,
Right. No, I'm not making an argument necessarily for what really made it, I guess, inevitably successful. But I think coming out of the video game crash of '82, this was a way to get video games palatable again. Mm-hmm. Companies really didn't believe that you could sell video games anymore. It was a fad that passed, like the Macarena. Okay, it was gone. It was here and gone. But
you don't do the Macarena anymore?
Only in the privacy of my own home and in front of very large mirrors, whatever I can really get to. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. So, and I don't speak Spanish, so it's kind of funny to listen to myself
See,
blah, 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 through the lyrics.
como el baño.
Anyway, yeah, exactly. So yeah, people thought it was a fad, and I think one of the ways that it became marketable was to be able to basically sell them as toys, and that was a way to kind of expand the market. There's some similar arguments I think that you could probably make about the Wii now, but we will wait for that because that's not the generation of consoles we're talking about. So let's start by looking at the combatants for this generation, the guys that went up against each other. There weren't that many in number back then, and the reason why is because of the reasons that we've already stated.
The crash.
The crash, and people really were having a hard time believing that video games were a viable market. But here we go, the players. We've got the NES, the Nintendo Entertainment System, that debuts in 1985. Mm-hmm. I don't think we need any introduction there, or at least no introduction that we haven't already given. The Sega Master System from 1986. I have played games on the Master System, but I certainly didn't own a Master System. What was your experience with the Master System?
I have never played one.
Okay, never played a Master System. All right, so we have very limited experience with the Master System.
Well, I mean, Nintendo had such huge market share in that time.
Yeah, I mean, and that's one of the things we will definitely get into. Sega is really trying to gain a foothold in ground even only by 1986. That Nintendo has really put a firm hold on the market in America, even within 1 year. And then the Atari 7800 from 1986 as well. Again, I think you could say the same story. Atari is really trying to salvage itself at that point.
By that time, they had been a bit played out and already had their stigma of Atari will release anything. You got to watch out for that. In the time before the internet, where you can just go up and check the latest Metacritic score,
right?
You had to be careful with what you bought.
Right. And there are plenty of ET cartridges buried in the desert that are testament to that. Mm-hmm. Good. All right. So those are our combatants. I don't think we need to necessarily get into all the features of each of those systems. But I don't think it's too much of a stretch to call the winner of this generation the NES.
Right.
We're looking at 60 million units sold of the NES. But I think when you think about the lifespan of the NES, we're only talking about really a matter of 5 or 6 years. Mm-hmm. So selling 60 million consoles in the wake of a video game crash.
Right.
In a matter of 6 years.
It's pretty much amazing.
It's pretty incredible.
And second place was I assume the Master System.
Master System with 13 million, so and I don't even have numbers for the 7800 because it wasn't even in the 10 million. I'm sure.
Clear first place for Nintendo, and I would say the testament to that is the fact here. From the formula I was talking about before, games was the big thing. If you want to say the innovation of having the Nintendo seal of quality as part of that,
oh, absolutely,
that's fine.